When American tank crews captured a Tiger I, they thought it was just steel tie, but what they found was far more terrifying.
Tunisia, late April 1943, the North African campaign neared its end. The desert wind had finally fallen silent. Amid the scattered remains of burned trucks and shattered helmets, an Allied reconnaissance unit moved cautiously through an olive grove outside Tunis. The war in North Africa was collapsing, but no one expected what they were about to find. Between the gnarled olive trees stood a beast of steel, still, intact, and impossibly massive. 60 tons of German engineering, its 88mm gun pointed skyward as if frozen mid-roar. The insignia on its side read Tiger 712. No smoke, no fire, no self-destruction charges, nothing. The crew had fled, leaving the most feared weapon in the German arsenal perfectly preserved. For a moment, silence dominated. The soldiers circled it cautiously, rifles raised, expecting a trap. But there was none. The hatches were open. The inside smelled of oil, sweat, and the faint bitterness of burned fuel. It was a ghost, the body of a monster that had outlived its purpose. To military intelligence, this was not just a discovery. It was a miracle. Every Tiger tank encountered before had been either destroyed in combat or deliberately blown apart to prevent capture. Yet here it stood, untouched. For Allied engineers, it was as if a dragon had fallen asleep and they now held the chance to study its scales. Within hours, word spread up the chain of command. American and British officers rushed to the site. Technicians crawled over the tank like archaeologists unearthing a lost civilization, measuring the thickness of its armor, sketching the cannon, photographing every bolt and bearing. Every detail mattered because no one in the Allied command had ever examined a Tiger I intact. Reports soon reached London and Washington. One German Tiger tank, abandoned and undamaged, located near Tunis. Vehicle number 712. Condition: operational. For the intelligence community, Tiger 712 was a gift beyond measure. This single vehicle could reveal the full extent of German armoured power, its strengths, its limits, and perhaps its flaws. What the Allies discovered inside would change how they viewed the enemy's war machine forever. Inside the engine compartment lay a revelation. The Maybach HL 230 engine, powerful but thirsty, designed to feed a machine heavier than any tank before it. Steel, precision, and brute force, all dependent on a fragile supply line of fuel that stretched across a crumbling empire. Every gallon it consumed became a burden on the Reich's logistics. The engineers noted how even small components showed signs of strain. The transmission groaned under the weight. The suspension system, though advanced, was at its limit. For all its armor and intimidation, the Tiger was mechanically a trapped animal, immensely strong, yet barely able to sustain itself beyond short bursts of movement. The discovery of Tiger 712 marked a turning point not in firepower, but in understanding. It exposed the paradox at the heart of German warfare: perfection in design, imperfection in sustainability. It was a weapon that could dominate the battlefield but not the campaign. As the tank was prepared for transport to Allied research centres, the men around it couldn't help but stare. Some felt awe, others disbelief. This was the machine that had crushed Sherman after Sherman, that had turned entire battalions into wreckage. Yet here it was conquered not by enemy fire, but by its own appetite. One officer reportedly whispered, half in reverence, half in irony, "The Tiger didn't die fighting, it starved." In that quiet Tunisian grove, the myth of German invincibility began to crack. The Allies had not only captured a tank, they had captured a symbol, a mirror reflecting the fatal arrogance of an empire that believed strength alone could win a war. Tiger 712 would soon be shipped across the Atlantic to the United States, where it would be dissected bolt by bolt. But at that moment, under the fading desert sun, it stood as both trophy and teacher, a silent monument to the truth of modern warfare. When the Tiger first appeared, it was as if the laws of warfare had changed overnight. In September 1942, on the Eastern Front near Leningrad, Soviet T-34 seconds reported being destroyed from distances they thought impossible more than 2,000 meters away. At first, the crews believed they were under fire from hidden artillery. Only later did they realize this was something new, something built to dominate. By November of that same year, the Tiger made its debut in North Africa. Its arrival was not just a deployment, it was an announcement. A 56.9-ton monster with armor up to 100 mm thick and an 88 mm KK-36 gun that could punch through any Allied tank long before they could return fire. German engineers had designed it to be invincible in direct combat. Its frontal armor could shrug off most Allied shells, and its gun could destroy an American M4 Sherman or a British Churchill with surgical precision. To Allied soldiers accustomed to fast-moving desert warfare, it felt like facing a battleship on land. For the men who first saw it, the impression was unforgettable. British Sergeant Jack Broom of the 48th Royal Tank Regiment later recalled, "It wasn't a tank, it was a moving fortress. We fired, and it didn't even flinch. Then it fired once and we were gone." Reports like this spread faster than the Tigers themselves, and that was the point. Even before mass deployment, the Tiger had achieved something few machines ever could: psychological supremacy. In the desert sands of Tunisia, that supremacy was absolute. The first Tigers of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion arrived in late 1942, shipped directly from Europe through Naples. They were slow to unload, difficult to maintain, and prone to mechanical failure. But once they reached the battlefield, they were devastating. At Tebourba, Mejez El Bab, and Maknassi, Allied tank crews watched in disbelief as their 75 mm rounds ricocheted off the Tiger's thick armor. The sound of an 88 mm cannon became an omen, a single shot followed by the hollow thud of metal tearing apart. To the German soldiers, the Tiger was proof that their engineering could restore the balance of war. To the Allies, it was a nightmare that refused to die. Its presence changed how entire divisions fought. American tank commanders began avoiding open fields, British units called for air support at the first sighting, and infantrymen whispered its name in fear. Tiger became less a machine and more a legend, a spectre haunting every battlefield rumor. And yet, behind the myth, there was also truth. The Tiger was terrifyingly effective in single engagements. Its armor and gun allowed it to destroy enemy tanks long before they were in range to fight back. But its strength came at a cost, one hidden from those facing it. Every Tiger required thousands of man-hours to build and maintain. It consumed more fuel than 3 Sherman tanks combined. And its complex transmission and suspension meant that even a minor breakdown could cripple it for days. Still, in early 1943, none of that mattered to the men on the receiving end of its fire. At Kasserine Pass in February, the Tiger's legend reached its peak. Allied armor was thrown into chaos, shells bounced harmlessly, platoons broke formation, communication lines collapsed under panic. The Americans fighting their first major engagement against German forces were overwhelmed not by numbers, but by fear. The Tiger was no longer just a weapon. It was an idea, the embodiment of German invincibility. Back in Berlin, propaganda officials seized the opportunity. Newsreels showed the Tiger crushing Allied vehicles, accompanied by Wagnerian music and slogans of mechanical perfection. The Wehrmacht portrayed it as a symbol of Aryan supremacy, an unstoppable machine, proving that German genius could overcome any setback. And for a time, the world believed it. But for those who would later study Tiger 712 inches at Olive Grove near Tunis, the truth would be more complex. Power, they would learn, can inspire awe but also conceal fatal flaws. Because even as the Tiger's shadow spread across battlefields from Tunisia to Kursk, it already carried within it the seeds of its own downfall: weight, fuel, and the arrogance of perfection. The legend of the tiger had begun, but so had the slow, invisible unraveling of its myth. North Africa, February 1943. The Battle of Kasserine Pass. The first real test came in the mountains of central Tunisia. American forces, still inexperienced, faced the Afrika Korps, reinforced with the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, the Tigers. What followed would become one of the most humiliating defeats in U.S. Army history. In a single day, the myth of German invincibility was reborn in steel and smoke. As dawn broke, the sound of engines rolled across the valley, deep, rhythmic, almost animal. Allied observers at first mistook them for approaching trucks. Then, through the morning haze, came the silhouettes, broad turrets, long barrels, and a shape unlike anything they'd seen before. The Tigers advanced slowly, deliberately, shells glinting in the sun. American M4 Shermans opened fire first. Their 75mm rounds struck the Tigers and bounced, leaving only sparks. One after another, the Shermans' shots ricocheted harmlessly off the thick frontal armor. The German gunners took their time, adjusting elevation, distance, and wind. When they fired back, the results were immediate and devastating. Each hit was fatal. Each explosion sent shock waves of disbelief through the Allied lines. Out of 52 Allied tanks engaged that morning, 46 were destroyed or disabled, but here's the truth the legend later distorted. Only a handful were actually hit by Tigers. The rest fell victim to mines, artillery, or simple panic. The idea of the Tiger was doing more damage than the tank itself. Military doctors began documenting a strange phenomenon among frontline troops. Trembling hands, racing pulses, refusal to advance when reports mentioned Tigers ahead. Soldiers fired at distant shadows, convinced they saw the unmistakable square silhouette. In some cases, reconnaissance planes reported Tiger formations that never existed. It was no longer mechanical superiority, it was psychological warfare. An internal U.S. Army memo from March 1943 read, "Enemy armor designated Tiger appears to induce paralysis of initiative in armored personnel. Further training required to combat rumor effect." That phrase, rumor effect, became the unofficial diagnosis of a spreading contagion, Tiger phobia. To counter it, Allied Command issued new intelligence films and manuals titled How to Fight the Tiger. Crews were taught to flank, to aim for the tracks, to use smoke, to coordinate airstrikes. But even with strategy and training, fear remained. For many soldiers, the Tiger represented not just danger but inevitability. One American tanker, interviewed years later, recalled, "You could feel it before you saw it. The air would vibrate. You'd think maybe it's just trucks. Then you'd hear the slow rotation of that turret, and you knew someone's going to die soon." The Tiger became both weapon and legend, a creature of rumor and dread. It was said that even mentioning the word Tiger on radio channels could spread panic among nearby units. Commanders instructed radio operators to replace the term with coded phrases like Special Heavy. Psychologists later called it anticipatory defeat, surrendering mentally before the battle even began. On a tactical level, the Tiger's impact was limited. On a psychological level, it was unmatched. German propaganda understood this perfectly. Newsreels showed Tigers crushing wrecked Allied tanks, their crews posing triumphantly. The machine's image became a tool of intimidation. Its silhouette, broad, low, predatory, became visual shorthand for German power. Yet even inside German ranks, the mystique was double-edged. Tiger crews carried enormous pressure. They were revered, but also isolated. Every time one was lost, it was a national embarrassment. Each mechanical failure, each abandonment, carried symbolic weight far beyond its tactical loss. By the spring of 1943, the Tiger's legend had transcended the battlefield. It haunted training grounds, intelligence briefings, even the dreams of young recruits. It was the first time in modern history that a machine had induced mass psychological trauma on such a scale. But behind that terror lay a fatal irony: the Allies feared the Tiger more than the Germans could sustain it. For every Tiger deployed, dozens were immobilized by breakdowns or stranded for lack of fuel. The monster that inspired panic was already running on borrowed time. In the end, the Tiger's power wasn't measured in miles or kills, it was measured in fear. A fear that distorted tactics, consumed morale, and reshaped Allied strategy. And yet, as powerful as that myth was, it would soon collapse under a weight even the thickest armor couldn't withstand the weight of reality. By the spring of 1943, the Tiger's legend had already conquered the battlefield. But beneath that armor of steel and fear, a quieter battle was being lost, not against the Allies, but against time, terrain, and gasoline. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, the same unit that fielded Tiger 712, kept meticulous records of every mile traveled, every breakdown, every gallon of fuel consumed. What those numbers revealed was devastating. Each Tiger carried a Maybach HL 230 engine, a 23-litre, 690 horsepower behemoth, designed to move 60 tons of armor. It was an engineering marvel, but one that demanded a constant sacrifice: fuel. A full tank held more than 500 litres, yet in the North African heat, that fuel disappeared fast. On paved roads, the Tiger could crawl about 120 miles, in battle often less than 40. Its appetite was monstrous, between 1 and 6 gallons per mile, depending on terrain. To keep a single Tiger company mobile for a week required more fuel than an entire infantry division. That, in the desert, was suicide. By late April, the German supply chain in Tunisia was unraveling. Allied bombers ruled the skies. Convoys that once brought fuel from Sicily and Naples now burned at sea. Every mile the Tigers advanced was 1 mile further from survival. In the war diaries of the 501st Battalion, the decline is recorded like a slow death. March 12-17 operational tanks. March 23-10 operational tanks. April 1-4 operational. By the end of the month, fewer than 3 could still move under their own power. Crews cannibalized parts from the dead to keep others alive. Fuel trucks became more precious than ammunition, and when the gasoline ran out, even the greatest tank on earth turned into nothing more than a steel coffin. It wasn't lack of courage that defeated the Tigers, it was physics. As Allied air superiority tightened its grip, the desert itself became an enemy. Engines overheated, transmissions seized, tracks snapped under the weight of 60 tons. The very mass that made the Tiger unstoppable in combat made it helpless in retreat. The collapse came quietly. Near the olive groves outside Tunis, the crews of Tiger 712 and its sister tanks faced an impossible choice. With no fuel, no parts, and no hope of reinforcement, they could either destroy their machines or flee on foot. Some followed orders, placing charges beneath their tanks. Others simply walked away. For reasons no one would ever fully understand, the crew of Tiger 712 did not destroy theirs. Perhaps they hoped to return. Perhaps they were interrupted. Perhaps they simply lacked the explosives. Whatever the reason, their decision left history, one of its rarest gifts, a Tiger preserved in perfect condition. When Allied forces reached the area days later, they found it sitting in silence, the dust undisturbed as if waiting. The officers who inspected it didn't yet know they were looking at a symbol not of German strength, but of its weakness. For years, the Allies had feared what the Tiger could do. Now, they were about to learn what it couldn't. The irony was crushing. Germany had built a weapon that could win any single duel, but lose the war of endurance. The Tiger's brilliance was also its curse. Every bolt, every gear, every inch of armor had been engineered to perfection. But perfection comes at a cost. Each tank required over 300,000 man-hours to produce. Each mile demanded a supply network the Reich could no longer sustain. In the ruins of Tunisia, surrounded by wreckage and silence, the myth of invincibility began to crack. One British mechanic, standing before the motionless Tiger, wrote in his field notes, "They built it too well. It cannot live in a world that is collapsing." That line became prophetic. In the months that followed, the same pattern repeated across Europe in Normandy, in the Ardennes, in the ruins of Berlin. Dozens of Tigers abandoned intact, not destroyed by fire or shell, but by emptiness. Empty fuel tanks, empty roads, empty promises of victory. It was the end of the Tiger's roar, a slow fade from terror to silence. To the Allies, Tiger 712 was no longer a threat. It was a teacher, a steel fossil from a dying empire, whispering a lesson that every army would remember. Power without fuel is only weight. And so, as the sun set over the Tunisian desert, the beast that once ruled the battlefield lay still among the olive trees, not defeated in combat, but conquered by its own hunger. Its armor remained unbroken, its gun untouched. But its empire had already run dry. To the Allied soldiers who stumbled upon it, it was an object of wonder. To Allied command, it was a treasure. Within hours, engineers and intelligence officers surrounded it, measuring, photographing, debating how to move 60 tons of German armor out of the African desert. The task seemed impossible. The Tiger was too heavy for standard transporters, too wide for most roads, and too valuable to risk damaging. But orders came straight from London and Washington. Bring it home. The recovery operation began at dawn. British and American mechanics worked side by side, improvising every step. They stripped nearby wrecks for chains, reinforced bridges with steel plates, and built custom ramps to lift the Tiger onto a modified trailer. What should have been a 4-hour job took 3 days. Desert sun baked the men and machines. Every jolt threatened to crack the Tiger's suspension, yet slowly, painfully, it began to move. Soldiers walking beside it joked that it was like towing a cathedral through the desert. When it finally reached the Tunis docks, the Tiger was loaded onto the Liberty ship SS Samuel P. Bush. Cranes strained under its weight. The ship's captain reportedly muttered, "If this thing sinks us, tell the brass it was worth it." Across the Atlantic, the voyage became a kind of pilgrimage. The Tiger was chained to the deck, tarped against salt spray, guarded day and night. Allied sailors would sneak above deck just to catch a glimpse of it, the machine that had haunted their brothers in North Africa. After weeks at sea, the ship reached Norfolk, Virginia. From there, the Tiger was transferred by rail to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, the U.S. Army's most advanced weapons testing facility. For the engineers at Aberdeen, the Tiger was a marvel unlike anything they had seen. American armor up to that point had been designed for mobility and mass production. The Tiger was something else, a handcrafted monument to mechanical excess. They began their study with reverence, as though dissecting a mythical creature. Panels were removed and catalogued. The 88mm gun was measured to the millimeter. Each weld was examined under magnification. They traced the electrical wiring, tested radio frequencies, drained fluids, even analyzed the paint composition. Every discovery brought admiration and disbelief. The Tiger's armor was thicker than expected, layered and hardened in ways that baffled American metallurgists. The gun breech was exquisitely machined, smoother and more balanced than any Allied weapon. Its optics, made by Zeiss, offered clarity that outclassed even US Navy rangefinders. But the deeper the engineers went, the more contradictions they found. For all its strength, the Tiger's design was painfully inefficient. Its gearbox was overcomplicated. Its suspension required constant maintenance. And its engine, the mighty Maybach HL-230, guzzled fuel at a rate that defied logic. Tests revealed that under normal conditions, the Tiger consumed 1.2 gallons per mile. In combat simulations, it could reach 6. Even on Aberdeen's concrete runways, the Tiger struggled. Its transmission overheated after less than an hour. Its steering clutched and groaned. To replace a broken track link took half a day. The engineers were stunned. Colonel John K. Barnes, head of U.S. Ordnance Development, summarized his findings in a report dated October 1943. The Tiger is unbeatable in a duel, but unsustainable in a campaign. It embodies the German philosophy of engineering without economy and power without proportion. That single sentence captured the essence of the Tiger's paradox. In one sense, the machine was magnificent, a pure expression of technological ambition. In another, it was suicidal, a weapon that devoured the very resources it needed to survive. At Aberdeen, soldiers gathered during lunch breaks just to see it run. When its engine roared to life, the ground trembled. The sound was mesmerizing, a low, throaty growl that seemed alive. But the awe always gave way to pragmatism. Someone would inevitably whisper, "Imagine fueling that thing." The Americans didn't simply test it, they learned from it. Engineers compared the Tiger's design with their own M4 Sherman, noting where simplicity triumphed over sophistication. They began sketching new concepts, tanks that balanced firepower, protection, and mobility. In time, those lessons would lead to the Patton, and eventually, the Abrams. But in 1943, all of that lay ahead. For now, the Tiger sat at Aberdeen like a fallen titan, stripped, examined, measured, and immortalized. Visitors described it as eerily intact, its armor scarred but unbeaten. Children of base officers climbed onto its hull. Soldiers took photographs beside it as if posing with a celebrity. The beast that once terrified entire armies had become a museum piece, a silent teacher of war. One observer wrote, "It looks asleep, not dead." And in that silence, another truth emerged, that technology without strategy is as fragile as courage without cause. The Tiger had crossed oceans to reach America. But its journey was not one of conquest, it was one of confession. A confession of overconfidence, of blind faith in power, and of the unspoken rule every empire eventually learns. Even the strongest steel cannot move without fuel. Aberdeen Proving Ground, October 1943. The reports were in. The Tiger had been tested, measured, and understood, and what the data revealed stunned the Allied command. For all its battlefield glory, the Tiger I was a weapon built to lose a war. Colonel G. M. Barnes, chief of the U.S. Ordnance Department's Research and Development Branch, summarized it in a single line that circulated quietly among intelligence circles. "It wins the fight, but not the campaign." The numbers told the truth no ideology could hide. Each Tiger demanded more maintenance hours than any other armored vehicle of the war. For every operational hour, it required 10 in repair. Its engine was pushed beyond design limits, its transmission overburdened, and its logistics unsustainable. Every new Tiger rolled off the assembly line at the cost of 3 Panzer IVs or 5 Stooge assault guns. Germany had built a masterpiece that could not be mass-produced, and in modern war, quantity was a weapon of its own. The Allies quickly drew their conclusions. At Fort Knox and Aberdeen, instructors rewrote tank doctrine. The goal was no longer to match the Tiger blow for blow, it was to outlast it. Shermans would move faster, fight in groups, exploit supply lines. Air superiority would isolate German armored divisions, and fuel that invisible currency of war would become the new front line. The lessons of Tiger 712 travelled across oceans and command tables. In London, analysts noted how the German High Command's obsession with prestige weapons, Tigers, Panthers, and the even larger King Tiger, was slowly strangling their war economy. Each new design was heavier, slower, and greedier for fuel than the last. By late 1943, Allied pilots began targeting not just tanks, but the arteries that kept them alive: refineries, trains, and convoys. The strategy was surgical. Instead of attacking the Tigers head-on, they starved them. When the Normandy landings began in June 1944, that strategy bore fruit. Dozens of Tiger I and Tiger II tanks waited inland, but few had enough fuel to reach the beaches. Some units were ordered to remain stationary defensive monuments of iron, others broke down before reaching combat. The same scenario repeated during the Battle of the Ardennes. Tanks that could have changed the tide sat silent, engines cold. Captured reports from German logistics officers painted the picture vividly. Fuel priority has shifted to the Luftwaffe. Ground armor now limited to short-range defense. Movement is suicide. The empire that had terrified Europe with its machines of war was now reduced to guarding its fuel depots. And yet, the Tiger's myth persisted even as its mechanical reality collapsed. Allied soldiers still feared its silhouette long after the threat had faded. That was its greatest irony. The Tiger's power lasted longer in imagination than in combat. Colonel Barnes's final memorandum, declassified decades later, reads almost like prophecy. The German Tiger demonstrates that a weapon of overwhelming capability, unsupported by logistics, is a weapon doomed to its own brilliance. That line became a quiet mantra among post-war designers. When U.S. engineers sketched out the M26 Pershing and later the M48 Patton, they built with restraint, balancing weight, fuel economy, and modular repair. Every bolt was a rejection of the Tiger's excess. For historians, this shift marked the true victory of the Allies not in battlefield statistics, but in philosophy. The Tiger I had forced its enemies to evolve intellectually. It taught them that the future of warfare would belong not to those who built the heaviest armor, but to those who could sustain it. As the war raged on in Europe, Tiger production slowed. Factories were bombed, resources dwindled. By 1945, fuel shortages had reached crisis levels. Tiger battalions began abandoning their tanks wholesale, leaving them by the roadside like stranded leviathans. Their crews, elite, exhausted, and disillusioned, walked away, knowing that no amount of bravery could overcome empty fuel tanks. The Tiger's downfall became the Empire's epitaph. It had been engineered to symbolize invincibility, yet it became the clearest proof that no weapon, however fearsome, could exist apart from the system that sustained it. In the ashes of that realization, a new military truth emerged, one that would define every army for the next century. Victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the most sustainable. Today, Tiger 712 stands in quiet dignity at Fort Moore, Georgia, no longer a weapon, but a witness. The paint has dulled to a pale shade of grey. Rust lines trace across its armor like veins, and sunlight filters through the open panels that once hid the engine of war. Students walk past it every day, young cadets, future officers most barely glance at first. To them, it is another relic in a long corridor of history. But those who stop, who take a moment to run their fingers across its cold steel, begin to feel what generations before them understood, that this machine was once the sharpest edge of human ambition. It represents both brilliance and blindness. The Tiger was everything a nation wanted to believe about itself: precise, dominant, invincible. And yet, it became the perfect symbol of that nation's downfall. It didn't die in battle. It starved, stranded by its own perfection. There is something poetic in that. The same qualities that made it fearsome also ensured its extinction. Its armor was too heavy, its design too complex, its thirst too great. It was a predator that consumed its own strength. In that sense, Tiger 712 is not merely a tank, it is a monument to the paradox of power. Look closely, and you can still see the fingerprints of its builders. The German craftsmen who riveted its plates, the soldiers who painted numbers on its turret, the crew who once trusted their lives to its hull. Each mark is a trace of human will and human error. Decades later, the echoes of its story still resonate in modern warfare. Every new generation of weapon carries the same temptation to chase perfection, to believe that power alone guarantees survival. And every generation must relearn what Tiger 712 already taught: that the strongest steel cannot outlast an empty tank of fuel. At Fort Moore, instructors sometimes bring cadets here for reflection exercises. They ask them to stand in silence before the Tiger and imagine it roaring across the battlefield, then imagine it running out of fuel, its crew stepping away under a blazing sun. The lesson is not about machinery, it's about consequence. The cadets are told, "This is what happens when design outruns reality." In that silence, the Tiger speaks louder than any textbook. It tells them that war is not won by the weapon that looks strongest, but by the system that endures longest. That the true test of power is not how hard you strike, but how far you can go. Some say the Tiger's roar ended in 1943, in that olive grove near Tunis. Others say it still echoes in the hum of jet engines, in the algorithms of modern defense systems, in the minds of those who design the next generation of machines. Perhaps both are true, because every time a nation builds too much, reaches too far, or believes its technology will save it from its own limits, the Tiger roars again, softly, in warning. And so it stands silent but unyielding in the halls of history, a relic, a teacher, and a reminder that even empires made of steel can fall victim to the simplest truth of all. In war, logistics wins. Firepower without fuel is just noise. The Tiger's roar did not end in battle. It ended in silence.